Привет!
A quick shout out, our Bank of Bad Motherfucker t-shirt sale ends on December 3rd. If you like it, link to the store is available in the description of the video below. Now on with our video. Today we are discussing how would the war between Turkey and Saudi Arabia go. Usual rules will apply. Allies don't exist, all other countries are considered neutral, though not necessarily impassable. If war suddenly broke out, nothing meaningful would happen at first. While border-to-border distance doesn't seem like much, the deserts of northern Saudi Arabia would mean actual distances between meaningful areas are much greater. Saudi Arabia could strike very quickly, with their medium-range ballistic missiles. Their arsenal is not very numerous though, and due to precision, most of those strikes would be sowing terror rather than destroying Turkish assets. Turkish ballistic missiles are more numerous, much shorter in range, but also on average better guided, giving them some actual tactical usefulness. Air forces of the both belligerents would quickly be in the air. Turks have some numerical advantage when it comes to air superiority missions, but Saudi planes are more capable individually. And overall, the Saudi fleet is more numerous. Due to technology edge and sheer fighter size difference, Saudi F-15s and Eurofighters should do well against even the most modern Turkish F-16s. Turkish fleet is a tad more multi-role. Training-wise, both sides do similar number of flight hours per year. A steady use of air-launched cruise missiles would start very soon by the planes launched from already operational Air Force bases. It is another area where Saudis have some edge. Turkey has their forces more dispersed over more air bases. Saudi air bases are larger, more complex, with multiple runways and well-protected facilities. But due to long distances, each side could amass only a portion of their air forces initially, stationed in range of the other, which would mean the defender would still enjoy considerable numerical superiority. Adding to that are air defenses of both belligerents. Saudi ones are much more potent. Coupled with Saudi Air Force, they would pretty much close down Turkish approaches to Saudi Arabia. But Turkish air defenses are still a credible threat in the context of possible local Saudi numbers and Turkish fighter jets. Saudis also have some more AWACS-type planes, as well as a more robust in-air refueling tanker fleet. With such support, some more damage may be inflicted by the Saudis. But ultimately even they would see unsustainable losses if they try to go for a prolonged bombing campaign. When it comes to naval forces, Turkey has a more potent fleet, nominally. It also has quite a few submarines, while Saudis have none. Technologically, fleets are roughly equal. Turkish ships are older but with modernized systems. But the biggest issue would be Suez Canal. If Egypt doesn't let anyone through, there would be no naval conflict. Even if Suez could be traversed, it would represent a choke point, a single very narrow point to be easily monitored. Both sides could easily wait in ambush and deal with any sort of naval incursion. Saudis a bit more through air power, and Turks could do it through sheer numbers and submarines. Most likely though, both sides would keep their naval fleets close to home. Turks might especially be helped by the fact most of their larger ships can offer some area air defenses, protecting the approach to their coast. The mentioned air war is of course based in hypothetical political bubble, where two countries freely overfly the area between them. Actual countries in between do have some air defense capabilities, but it is plausible that, absent of larger world's powers to interfere, they would keep to themselves and simply ignore overflights over a certain corridor. If the scenario was to go even more hypothetical, one could include a ground war. Turkish forces already operate to some extent in northern Syria and Iraq. Amassing huge armies for either Saudis or Turks and going into the area in between is theoretically possible. Realistically, the countries in between would fight back. But let's assume that, same as with the air corridor, a land corridor is open to the two belligerents, as long as they stick to mostly uninhabited parts of Iraq, Syria and possibly Jordan to go through. Distance involved is a problem for both, but terrain makes it all much worse. Syrian desert is a dry, inhospitable area smack in the middle of the corridor. Roads are almost inexistent on the north to south axis, and while the fairly hard surface is manageable for combat vehicles, the logistical lines of various trucks carrying supplies would suffer immensely. slow speed, frequent breakdowns and underutilized payload capacity so acceptable off-road performance can be had would be present, both for Saudis and Turks. Furthermore, both sides' armies aren't really configured to wage war a long way from home over harsh terrain. Ratio of maneuver troops to other support units is roughly similar for both Turkey and Saudis, but is quite bad when compared to a military that is more geared towards power projection operations, in this example the UK. Furthermore, countries such as UK or US have their structured reserve units geared mostly as additional logistics units, whereas Turkish and Saudi reserve units are basically more infantry. Same thing can be applied to Saudi National Guard, which while well paid and trained, is basically geared towards ops within the country, not really trained for combined arms operations as part of offensives outside Saudi Arabia. While Saudis sometimes taunt hundreds of thousands of reservists, that figure is basically mobilization potential. When using a common denominator, let's say reserve forces with some actual training being done, Turkey is far ahead. With all that being said, Turkey has a much larger ground force. Another area where Turkey has some advantage is recon. Their satellites could sporadically track presence of large formations in desert. Aerial recon assets are roughly comparable. Turkey could try and rush in with their more numerous armored units. But without waiting for the logistics train while approaching Saudi Arabia, those tanks would be very much exposed. Whatever air cover Turkey could muster close to the Saudi border would likely not be enough. Similar push by the Saudis would probably end even worse, as they simply lack the numbers. Reaching several times more numerous Turkish defenders far away from their Saudi home would yield a disaster. Scouting vehicles more suited to the desert terrain are a Saudi specialty, as well as vehicles carrying anti-tank missiles. Overall, it's apparent that the Saudi units are more motorized on average, meaning Turks would be hard-pressed to fully utilize their numerical advantage in offensive ops across the desert. When it comes to attack helicopters, the Turks have a bit more, but Saudi helicopters are more capable. Defense from those and other low-flying threats would be performed by mobile anti-air SAM systems. Saudi ones have longer reach, but are less numerous. Turkey does have a larger air mobility fleet, but if it tries to use it offensively, Saudi more potent air force coupled with their air defenses would quickly lower its numbers. So Turkey would mostly use it to haul supplies behind the front lines. Helicopters are a continuation of the same issue. Without rivers or similar obstacles to go across, there would be little reason to risk using them over the front line. In light of all that, neither side would really want to go forward on the ground, at least not via a quick push across the desert. Months would pass until one of the sides might feel semi-confident enough to try and mount an offensive. That side might be Turkey. When mobilizing its population, its numerical edge would be even larger. But going into the desert would require very slow, methodical operations, with various supply bases and newly constructed air bases in the desert. Otherwise, the closer the Turkish force gets to Saudis, the more exposed the Turks would be to Saudi local aerial supremacy. Turks might be helped by their much more numerous artillery, providing most of their fire support. Actual training and combat efficiency of soldiers is often accentuated as lacking when it comes to Saudi army, despite their professional status. But Turkish conscripts, as they're simply lacking experience, are unlikely to be any better. So the final outcome of a protracted year-long Turkish effort to inch closer to Saudi territory would have them lose more aircraft than Saudis, as well as continuously lose bits and pieces of their supplied effort, both to the environment and to Saudi strikes. Eventually, they might reach into Saudi territory, over the empty areas which would be lightly defended, but they would also lose more soldiers than Saudis in the process. Whether the whole effort would be worth it would be questionable. Of course, Saudis could not do much to Turkey either. Realistically, their effort to reach it would be stopped even before the Turkish borders, as Turkey drowns them in their numbers. Final verdict: Turkish marginal victory. Big thanks goes to all my patrons on Patreon. Without you, we wouldn't be able to make as many videos. Do subscribe if you like my content, and if you want to be notified about new videos, don't forget to click that bell button. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.